Maid's daughter warned a billionaire not to sign. The room froze in shock. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a day like no other in the grand mansion of billionaire Charles Monroe. The meeting was set in the heart of his extravagant estate, a massive glass and steel palace perched on a cliff overlooking the sprawling city below. Inside, the conference room gleamed with polished marble floors, towering windows, and a massive chandelier that sparkled like 1,000 diamonds. Charles, the owner of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, sat at the head of the long table. His colleagues, investors, and advisors flanked the table, all eagerly awaiting his signature on a deal that would seal their fortune. The room buzzed with anticipation, the excitement palpable in the air. Everyone was eager to see the moment when Charles would sign the contract, a contract that promised millions in profits and guaranteed their legacy. But amidst the crowd, a small figure stood almost unnoticed. Amelia, the young daughter of the housekeeper, had been quietly cleaning the corners of the room. She had no business being here, just another invisible member of the staff. Her mother had been asked to work overtime today, and Amelia had been brought along, with a strict instruction to stay out of sight. She had learned to blend in, to remain silent and unnoticed. Yet, as she dusted the windowsill, she couldn't help but overhear fragments of the conversation. The words she heard made her stomach tighten with unease. There was something wrong with this deal, something hidden beneath the layers of legalese and promises of wealth. Her instincts, sharp from years of observing the world from the sidelines, told her that this contract wasn't as it seemed. As the investors continued to discuss figures and projections, Amelia's gaze fell upon the document in front of Charles. She could see the words and the signatures, but her mind kept circling back to a nagging feeling. Something wasn't right. The document, signed and ready to be approved, seemed too simple, too clean, and yet it carried such enormous stakes. She couldn't explain it, but she knew deep down that something was about to go terribly wrong if it was signed. With a trembling hand, Amelia stepped forward, catching the attention of the room. Her voice, though small, cut through the noise. "Don't sign that," she said, her words ringing with an authority that even surprised her. The room fell silent. Charles looked up, his expression one of mild amusement, as if he hadn't noticed the little girl standing there. "What do you mean, young lady?" he asked, his tone condescending. The room waited, holding its breath. No one had expected this. Amelia, standing at the edge of the table, looked around at the faces of the powerful men and women in the room. They all stared at her as if she didn't belong. "There's something wrong with this contract," she continued, her voice growing steadier. "I don't know what, but it's not right." The silence in the room deepened. Charles raised an eyebrow, clearly not taking her seriously. "And what would you know about contracts, young lady?" he mocked, a smirk playing on his lips. But Amelia, feeling a surge of courage she didn't know she had, stepped forward and pointed to the corner of the document. "The date is wrong. It's signed for tomorrow, but the agreement was supposed to be for the day after. And there's something off about the signature. I've seen it before." The room's atmosphere shifted. The advisors exchanged uneasy glances. A few investors shifted in their seats. Charles's smirk faltered, and he looked down at the contract. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Amelia, the invisible maid's daughter, had just thrown a wrench into a deal that seemed foolproof. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Amelia's warning had turned everything upside down. Was it just the ramblings of a child? Or had the young girl actually uncovered something much more sinister? The billion-dollar deal, which had seemed like a sure thing only moments ago, now hung in the balance, all because of the words of someone nobody had taken seriously. The room froze in shock, and for a moment, no one spoke. The room remained eerily silent after Amelia's warning. Charles Monroe, the billionaire, stared at the young girl, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, no one moved. The powerful men and women who had surrounded him just moments before now found themselves unsure of how to proceed. Amelia, the maid's daughter, had interrupted something they all thought was an easy win, and now she had their full attention. The contract, once a guarantee of wealth and success, now lay in the center of the table like a ticking time bomb. Charles hesitated, his gaze flickering between the document and the young girl standing before him. She was just a child, someone who had no reason to be in this room. But something about her words, the way she had pointed out the discrepancies, made him pause. He looked up at his advisors, hoping for some reassurance. But all he saw were faces full of uncertainty. The confidence they once held seemed to have disappeared in an instant. The power dynamic had shifted. The billionaire was no longer the one in control. Amelia, who had always been invisible in this world of wealth and influence, had forced everyone to stop and think. Charles took a deep breath and slowly reached for the contract, his fingers trembling slightly. He had to act quickly, but as he did, the reality of the situation hit him. Amelia wasn't just a maid's daughter. She was someone with an astute eye, someone who had noticed something the experts hadn't. His mind raced. How could he have missed something so simple? The thought of signing a deal that could lead to disaster terrified him. He slowly put the pen down, his eyes still fixed on the contract. Amelia had just saved him from what could have been a monumental mistake. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next move. But it was Amelia who broke the silence once again. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly, her voice carrying more weight than anyone could have imagined. "There's still time to fix it." Her words struck Charles harder than he expected. He had spent his entire life building his empire, carefully making decisions, one after another, always focused on the bigger picture. But now, in this moment, he realized that sometimes the smallest voice in the room could carry the most truth. Amelia wasn't just trying to protect herself or her mother. She was trying to protect everyone in that room from a mistake that could cost them everything. The billion-dollar deal, the carefully orchestrated plans, all of it could come crashing down if they didn't stop and reconsider. Amelia, standing there in her simple uniform, was more powerful than any of them had realized. Charles felt a mix of emotions. Anger at himself for not seeing it sooner. Gratitude toward this young girl who had more courage and wisdom than he had given her credit for. And a deep sense of shame for having dismissed her in the first place. The room, still frozen in shock, began to stir. Some of the investors exchanged glances, their skepticism slowly turning into respect. Others looked at each other with unease, unsure of what to do next. But Charles, for the first time in years, felt unsure as well. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I think we need to review this one more time," he said, his voice firm but uncertain. "I won't sign until I'm sure it's the right thing." His words were met with a stunned silence. The advisors, who had expected this deal to be a formality, now found themselves questioning everything. What had once seemed like a certainty had suddenly become a massive question mark. The billion-dollar empire Charles had built, his pride and joy, now rested on a decision that Amelia had forced him to reconsider. And in that moment, Charles realized that sometimes the most unexpected voices could save everything. Amelia had not only warned him of a financial disaster, she had reminded him of something far more important, that true power did not lie in money or influence, but in the ability to listen and make the right choice when it mattered most. Charles stood still, his hand still resting on the edge of the contract, his mind swirling with confusion. The entire room had just shifted in tone. What had once been an effortless business transaction now felt like a delicate thread about to snap. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the room, from the nervous investors to his bewildered advisors. And yet, among them, it was the young maid's daughter who had brought everything to a halt. Amelia, a girl who had no business being here, yet somehow held the power to change the course of this deal, and perhaps even his life. The silence in the room stretched longer than Charles cared to admit. He could feel the heat of the tension, and it made him uncomfortable. He looked at his colleagues, their faces now etched with uncertainty. Not one of them had expected this. They had assumed that Charles, with all his power and influence, would simply sign the deal without a second thought. But now, their certainty had turned into hesitation. They had all been blind to something that Amelia had seen clearly from the beginning. Charles let out a deep sigh, his frustration growing. How had he allowed himself to be so swept up in the moment, so sure of this deal, without fully understanding the risks? He had prided himself on his sharp instincts, but now, in this small, quiet moment, he realized how easily even the most powerful men could be fooled. Amelia, standing across from him with her head slightly bowed, didn't seem to notice the effect she had on everyone around her. She was simply doing what she had been taught, doing her job, staying out of sight. But now, she had forced the room to stop and take notice. And that was something Charles couldn't ignore. He had to admit it. He was impressed. Amelia wasn't just some child who had stumbled upon a mistake. No, she had an insight that no one else had. The way she had pointed out the discrepancy, the subtle shift in the details that even the most experienced minds in the room had missed. It was almost as if she had a special ability. And that was a realization that hit Charles like a thunderclap. He had grown accustomed to relying on his own sharp mind, and the minds of the best and brightest professionals. But Amelia had shown him something else, something he had taken for granted. The ability to see things others couldn't. It was a talent that transcended money and power. With a deep breath, Charles looked up at Amelia. For the first time, he saw her not as the invisible maid's daughter, but as someone who had just saved him from a monumental mistake. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft but genuine. Amelia blinked, surprised by his words. She had been expecting more ridicule, more dismissal. But instead, she received gratitude. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded, her cheeks flushing slightly. It was at that moment that the room began to stir again. The investors shifted in their seats, a few glancing at each other with confusion and disbelief. They had expected the deal to go through smoothly, but now, it seemed as though everything was in question. And it was Amelia's actions that had brought everything to a screeching halt. Charles turned back to his advisors, a new resolve in his voice. "We're going to take another look at this," he said firmly. "I don't care how many zeros are on that contract. If there's even the slightest chance it could be wrong, we need to fix it." His words rang out, clear and decisive. The tone in the room shifted once again, but this time, it was one of respect. The investors and advisors began to murmur among themselves, acknowledging the weight of what Charles had just said. And in that moment, Amelia understood. Her warning hadn't just saved a deal. It had saved them all from a disaster they hadn't even seen coming. Charles had learned the hard way that sometimes, the smallest voices were the ones that mattered the most. As the meeting continued, the entire dynamic had shifted. The room was no longer filled with a sense of arrogance or entitlement. Instead, there was a quiet humility that had taken root. Charles had learned something that day, something he would never forget. No matter how much power, wealth, or success one had, there was always something to be learned from those who had less. And sometimes, they were the ones who could see the truth when everyone else was blinded by their own certainty. As the meeting continued, Charles sat back in his chair, the weight of his earlier decision still fresh in his mind. The room, once filled with self-assurance and arrogance, had been transformed. The atmosphere was now filled with a quiet tension. Amelia, the maid's daughter, had done what no one else could. She had opened his eyes to something he had missed, and now everyone in the room seemed to respect her, even if they hadn't fully acknowledged it yet. Charles felt a strange sense of gratitude toward her, even though he had never given her a second thought before today. The investors were still murmuring among themselves, unsure of how to proceed. Charles, however, had made up his mind. He was not going to rush into signing anything until he had absolute certainty. The contract sat in front of him, now a symbol of both opportunity and risk. He leaned forward and, with deliberate slowness, began to flip through the pages again. Every line, every clause, had to be examined. He wasn't going to let something slip by again, not with so much at stake. Meanwhile, Amelia stood by the door, unsure of her place in this sudden whirlwind of attention. She had never been part of a meeting like this, and now she felt out of place. She had only spoken up because she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. But now, she was a subject of quiet whispers and sidelong glances. Despite the attention, she still felt small in a room full of people whose lives seemed to revolve around numbers that she couldn't even begin to comprehend. But what surprised her most was the lack of mockery. After her warning, no one laughed at her. No one dismissed her as just the maid's daughter. They were listening. That in itself was a victory. Charles, his mind racing through calculations and potential outcomes, finally turned his attention back to her. His gaze was different now, less dismissive, more reflective. He had seen something in her, something beyond her age, beyond her status in this room. "Amelia," he said, his voice low but steady, "you were right. I owe you more than just thanks." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Amelia didn't know how to respond. The kind of respect that didn't come from wealth or status, but from truth. Charles's voice cut through the silence again, firm and commanding. "We will reevaluate the deal. No decision will be made until we are absolutely sure this is the right move. I've learned that no amount of money or status should ever cloud your judgment. Not in this world, not in any world." The investors nodded, some reluctantly, others more readily. They had no choice but to agree. Charles was their leader, their anchor, and if he said they would wait, they would wait. But more than that, they now understood the value of a fresh perspective, even one from an unexpected source. Amelia, still standing by the door, felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. It was the first time she had ever been truly seen in this house. And for the first time, she didn't feel like just a maid's daughter. She felt like she belonged, even if just for a moment. As the meeting continued, the air felt different. Lighter, almost. The tension that had gripped the room had dissolved, replaced by something more powerful. Respect. And for the first time in his life, Charles Monroe understood what it meant to listen, not just to the voices that were expected, but to the voices that had always been overlooked. Amelia's voice had changed everything, and he knew that from that moment on, he would never take the people around him for granted again. As the meeting drew to a close, the atmosphere in the room was markedly different from how it had started. The tension had dissipated, replaced by a newfound respect for Amelia, the young maid's daughter, whose insight had changed the course of the entire deal. Charles sat back in his chair, his mind racing with thoughts about the events that had unfolded. He had been so sure, so confident in the success of the deal, but now he realized how easily one small mistake could have undone everything. And it wasn't just the contract that had changed, it was his perspective. For the first time in his life, Charles realized that power and wealth weren't everything. True power, the kind that truly made a difference, lay in the ability to listen, to understand, and to value the voices that often went unheard. Amelia had taught him that. After the meeting, Charles called Amelia into his office. He wanted to talk to her, to thank her properly, and to let her know how much her actions had meant. She had been hesitant at first, unsure if she even belonged in a room like his office. But when she entered, she was met with a warm smile from Charles, a smile that held no hint of mockery, only genuine appreciation. "Amelia," he began, his voice soft but firm, "you've done more than just help me today. You've opened my eyes to something I've been blind to for far too long." Amelia looked up at him, her heart racing. She had never imagined that her warning would lead to this moment. "I didn't do anything special," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just noticed something." Charles shook his head, his expression serious. "No, what you did was special. You saw something that no one else did, and because of that, you saved me from making a huge mistake. You saved all of us." The sincerity in his voice left Amelia speechless. She had never imagined that someone like Charles Monroe, a billionaire, would take the time to acknowledge her, to thank her for something she considered so small. But to him, it wasn't small. It was everything. Charles stood up and walked around the desk, stopping in front of Amelia. He looked down at her, and for the first time, he saw her not as a maid's daughter, but as someone who deserved respect, someone whose voice had the power to change things. "I want you to know something," he continued, his tone gentle but unwavering. "You have a gift for seeing what others don't. That's something rare, something valuable." Amelia's eyes widened in disbelief. "A gift? I'm just a maid's daughter." Charles smiled, his gaze softening. "No, Amelia, you're more than that, and I'm going to make sure that everyone sees it." With those words, Charles reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to Amelia, who took it with trembling hands. "This is for you," he said. "Consider it a token of my appreciation. But more than that, it's a promise that your voice will always be heard, that you will always be respected, no matter where you come from." Amelia opened the envelope, her eyes widening when she saw the check inside. It was for an amount far beyond anything she could have ever imagined. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away, not wanting to seem weak in front of him. I don't know what to say," she stammered. You don't have to say anything, Charles replied. Just know that you've made a difference. And you always will. Amelia stood there for a moment, unsure of how to process everything that had just happened. She had never imagined her life would change like this, that her voice, her actions, could have such an impact. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. She wasn't just a maid's daughter anymore. She was someone with value, someone who could make a difference. As she left Charles's office that day, the weight of the check in her pocket felt like a symbol of everything she had just learned. That no matter how small you might seem, no matter how invisible you might feel, your voice could still be heard. And sometimes, it only takes one person to listen for everything to change. Amelia had left Charles's office that day feeling like a different person. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. It wasn't just about the check in her pocket, though that was life-changing in itself. It was about the respect, the acknowledgement of her worth that she had never expected. She had always been the quiet observer, the invisible worker who did what she was told and stayed out of the way. But now, things were different. The following days at the estate felt surreal. Charles's acknowledgement of her had rippled through the staff, and although she hadn't asked for it, a subtle shift had occurred. People started to treat her differently. No one mocked her or ignored her anymore. Instead, there were nods of respect, even smiles. The housekeeper, her mother, had noticed it too. "What's going on, Amelia?" her mother asked one evening as they sat together for dinner. "Why does everyone seem so different around you?" Amelia had smiled and shrugged. She wasn't sure how to explain it. She hadn't done anything except speak up when something felt wrong. But her mother, ever observant, had a knowing look in her eyes. "People can tell when you have value," her mother said softly. "And now they see you for who you truly are." Amelia didn't fully understand what her mother meant until later that week when she was called into Charles's office again. This time, the atmosphere was more casual, but the respect in the air was undeniable. Charles greeted her with a warm smile. "Amelia, I've been thinking a lot about what you did. It's rare to find someone with your clarity and insight," he said. "I'd like to offer you something." He paused for a moment, watching her carefully. "I want you to take on a new role here at the estate. It's not just cleaning. I'm offering you an opportunity to work closely with my team, to use your skills in a way that could change things here. You've shown that you can see what others miss, and I think you could do a lot more with that kind of vision." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She had never imagined such an offer. She had spent so long thinking of herself as just the maid's daughter, someone who wasn't supposed to have a voice in matters of importance. And yet here was Charles, the man who had built an empire, asking her to join his team. He had recognized her potential, and that meant everything to her. "I don't know what to say," Amelia replied, her voice filled with disbelief. "You don't have to say anything right now," Charles responded with a gentle smile. "Take your time, think it over. But I want you to know that the door is open for you. You've proven that you have the kind of vision we need." Amelia left the office that day in a daze. She couldn't quite wrap her mind around it. How had everything changed so quickly? Just a few days ago, she had been invisible, just another face in the background, and now she was being offered a chance to change her life. She thought about her mother, about how much they had struggled, about the long hours and the quiet sacrifice. Amelia had always dreamed of something more, but she never thought it would come in the form of an opportunity like this. The next few days were a whirlwind. Amelia spent hours talking with Charles's team, learning about the estate's operations, about the projects they were working on. They were all fascinated by her insights, and the more they listened, the more they realized how much she had to offer. It wasn't just about cleaning or staying out of sight. Amelia had a sharp mind, a deep understanding of people, and the kind of intuition that could help solve problems others didn't even know existed. Soon, her role at the estate evolved. She became an advisor of sorts, offering her perspective on various decisions, and as time went on, it became clear to everyone that her contributions were invaluable. Amelia was no longer just a maid's daughter. She was a trusted member of the team, someone whose opinion mattered. And as for Charles, he never forgot the lesson that Amelia had taught him. True power wasn't just about money or influence. It was about the ability to see the potential in others, to listen when they had something to say, and to offer opportunities that could change their lives. In the end, Amelia's life was transformed, not just by the wealth and opportunities that came her way, but by the realization that her voice had the power to make a difference. She had proven that even the smallest voice, when heard, could change the course of a story, and it was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Amelia's new role at the estate quickly became more than just a job. It became a testament to her growth and potential. With every passing day, she found herself becoming more involved in the decision-making process, her opinions valued and sought after. She was no longer the quiet observer, but an active participant in the life of the estate. Charles, who had once dismissed her as just the maid's daughter, now considered her an essential part of his team. He valued her insights and often sought her opinion before making important business decisions. She had become his trusted advisor, and it was clear to everyone that she was no longer an outsider. Her mother, who had always been proud of her daughter, was in awe of the transformation. She had watched Amelia struggle, silently bearing the weight of their hardships. But now, she saw her daughter standing tall, recognized for her intelligence and determination. It was a moment of quiet pride for her, a moment when she realized that the sacrifices she had made for her daughter had all led to this. The other staff members, who had once seen Amelia as just another worker, also began to view her differently. They respected her not just for her position, but for her ability to see the bigger picture, to understand the intricacies of the estate's operations, and to make decisions that helped improve their lives. The change was gradual, but unmistakable. Amelia's presence was no longer a background hum. It was a force that everyone felt. And then came the day when Charles called her into his office again. This time, it wasn't just about business or advice. It was personal. He sat behind his desk, looking more relaxed than usual, his expression thoughtful. "Amelia," he said, looking up from his papers, "I've been thinking a lot about how far you've come. I want to take this further. I want to make sure that you have every opportunity to succeed, not just here, but in the future as well." Amelia blinked, not sure where this conversation was going. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. Charles leaned forward, his gaze serious but kind. "I want to help you get an education, Amelia. You've shown so much promise, and I believe you deserve the chance to pursue your dreams, whatever they may be. I've arranged for a scholarship for you to attend one of the best schools in the country. You'll have access to resources, guidance, and a network that will open doors for you." Amelia was speechless. She had never imagined that something like this could happen. She had always wanted to study, to learn, but the financial constraints had always held her back. Now, here was Charles, offering her the very thing she had longed for. I don't know what to say," she stammered, overwhelmed by the weight of his words. "You don't have to say anything," Charles replied with a reassuring smile. "Just know that I believe in you, and I want to see you reach your full potential. This is your opportunity, Amelia." For the first time in her life, Amelia felt a surge of hope that had been dormant for so long. She thought about the sacrifices her mother had made, about how far they had come from the days of scraping by. This scholarship wasn't just a chance for her to get an education. It was a chance to break free from the limitations of her past and build a future she had once only dreamed of. As she left Charles's office that day, the weight of the offer in her mind, Amelia couldn't help but smile. She had always felt like she didn't belong, like she was just a spectator in a world that wasn't meant for people like her. But now, she knew that she belonged. She had earned her place at the table, not because of her wealth, not because of her status, but because of her intelligence, her insight, and her ability to make a difference. And with that scholarship in her hands, she knew that this was just the beginning of her journey. There was no limit to what she could achieve now, and for the first time, she truly believed it. Amelia's life had changed in ways she never thought possible. After receiving the scholarship from Charles, she felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. The world, which had once felt so vast and out of reach, now seemed full of opportunities. She spent her days studying, diving into books and subjects that had always seemed just out of her grasp. Charles's offer had opened doors, but more importantly, it had unlocked something inside her, a belief that she could be more than just the maid's daughter. She could be someone who shaped her own future, someone with power over her destiny. As Amelia began her studies at the prestigious university, she found herself surrounded by a world of people with wealth, power, and privilege. Yet, despite the stark contrasts in their backgrounds, Amelia never once felt inferior. Her intelligence and drive had earned her a place among them. In fact, It was her unique perspective, shaped by years of hard work and observation, that set her apart. While others were concerned with trivial matters, Amelia was focused on the bigger picture. Her professors recognized her ability to think critically, to analyze complex problems, and to offer solutions that others might miss. She quickly became one of the top students in her class, earning respect from her peers and professors alike. Back at the estate, her relationship with Charles continued to evolve. What had started as a business relationship had transformed into a mentor-mentee bond, and in many ways, a friendship. Charles would often check in on her progress, offering guidance and encouragement. He had seen potential in her from the beginning, and now, he was watching her turn that potential into something extraordinary. One day, during a visit home, Charles pulled Amelia aside. "I've been following your progress," he said with a smile. "You're doing incredible things, and I'm proud of you. But I think it's time for you to take the next step." Amelia looked at him, curious. "What do you mean?" she asked. Charles's smile widened. "I think you're ready to lead a project. You've learned a lot, and I want you to put that knowledge into action. I'm offering you the opportunity to lead an initiative here at the estate. You'll be in charge, making decisions, and overseeing a team. I believe you're ready for it." The offer took Amelia by surprise, but it wasn't an offer she could refuse. The thought of leading a project, of being in charge, excited her. It was a chance to prove to herself, and to everyone else, that she wasn't just someone who could take orders. She was someone who could give them, someone who could drive change. As Amelia took on this new role, her confidence soared. She proved herself to be a natural leader, someone who was capable of managing a team and making tough decisions. The estate flourished under her leadership, and the changes she implemented had a lasting impact. Charles watched with pride as Amelia thrived in her new role. He knew that he had given her the opportunity, but it was her hard work, intelligence, and determination that had led her to success. Over time, Amelia became an influential figure, not just at the estate, but in the community as well. Her story, of rising from the background to take center stage, became an inspiration to others. She showed them that no matter where you start, with hard work and determination, you can rise above your circumstances and create your own path. Amelia had learned the most important lesson of all, that true power wasn't found in wealth or status. It was found in the ability to shape your own future, to create opportunities where none seemed to exist. And with that power, she had built a life beyond her wildest dreams. As the years passed, Amelia continued to thrive in ways she had never imagined. The leadership role at the estate had propelled her forward, and with each project she oversaw, her confidence grew. She had transitioned from a young girl with a quiet voice to a woman whose decisions shaped the future of the estate and impacted the community around her. She was no longer the maid's daughter. She had become a force in her own right, known for her intelligence, drive, and unshakable sense of justice. Charles, who had once been her employer, now regarded her as an equal, often seeking her counsel in matters of great importance. Their relationship had evolved into a deep and genuine friendship, built on mutual respect. He had been the one to give her the chance, but it was Amelia who had seized it and made the most of it. One afternoon, Charles invited her to lunch, as he often did when he wanted to discuss the estate's future. As they sat together in the dining room, Charles leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. "Amelia," he began, "I've seen you grow in ways I never expected. When I first offered you that scholarship, I never could have predicted how much you'd change. You've not only proven your worth to me, but to everyone who doubted you." Amelia smiled, her gaze fixed on her mentor. "I don't think anyone ever really doubted me," she said. "I think I doubted myself. But with the opportunities you gave me, I've been able to see what I'm truly capable of." Charles nodded, a proud smile tugging at his lips. "You've earned every bit of it, Amelia. And now, I have something else I want to offer you." Amelia raised an eyebrow, curious. "What is it?" Charles paused for a moment, his gaze intense. "I want to retire," he said simply. Amelia's eyes widened in surprise. "But, you've built this empire. Everything you've done has brought you here." Charles chuckled softly. "Yes, but I've come to realize that it's time for someone else to take the reins. I've seen how you've handled things here, and I believe you're ready. The estate, everything I've worked for, it's yours if you want it." The weight of his words hit Amelia like a wave. To think that Charles, the man who had mentored her, was willing to entrust her with the future of everything he had built. It was an honor beyond words. But it also came with a deep sense of responsibility. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "I'm sure," Charles replied. "I've seen you make decisions with more wisdom than some of the wealthiest people I know. You have a vision for this place, and I'm confident you'll take it to new heights." Amelia's heart swelled with gratitude.